Oh, I moved into apartment 60F of then found the story that wrote me Reddit drama story. They say you can live your whole life next to someone and never really know who they are. Not just secrets tucked away behind closed doors or the subtle pauses when someone lies. I mean truly not knowing. Like a stranger moving through the same walls, breathing the same air, and yet leaving no trace of who they were. That's how it was with the woman in 6E. I never learned her name. Never saw her mailbox open. Never caught a glimpse of her ordering takeout or picking up a package. But somehow, I heard her. Every night. The building itself wasn't old in the charming way people sometimes mean. It was worn. Its years showing not through character but through exhaustion. Faint water stains etched like continents on the hallway ceiling. Mailroom tile permanently darkened from years of shoes tracking in wet November filth. The elevator worked only if you promised it something, and the radiator in my unit hissed like a warning more than warmth. I moved into 6F in early spring. I'd just gotten out of a bad living situation. 2 roommates, both of whom had decided I was their therapist. One of them cried when her online boyfriend ghosted her for 12 hours. The other left little baggies of herbs taped to my bedroom door, claiming they warded off aggressive male energy. I don't know what they thought I was, but I had to get out. SIF was small, barely enough room for my bed and bookshelves, but it was mine. Mine and, apparently, hers. On the first night, I thought it was just an old building settling, but by the third night, I realized the pattern. Always at 1:23 a.m., I'd hear it. Not from the hallway, not from above or below. Directly from the other side of my bedroom wall. A soft dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across hardwood. Then 3 short thuds. Pause. Dragging again. Sometimes I thought I heard a voice, low and wet, like someone whispering through water. I didn't panic. Not at first. Rationality has a way of keeping your terror in check, at least until it begins to wear thin. I told myself she was moving furniture, that she was perhaps ill, maybe even bedridden and dragging something to help herself. Maybe it was medical equipment. Maybe she needed help. I resolved to knock one afternoon just to check in, maybe pretend I was being neighborly. I walked to 6E the next morning, standing outside her door with a package I pretended had been delivered to me by mistake. But when I lifted my hand to knock, something stopped me. Not fear, exactly. Something else the door. It was wrong. The paint was the same off-white as mine, but newer, glossier. The peephole looked painted over. No welcome mat, no scuff marks, not even a lock that looked used. Like a door set for a stage that no one actually used. I knocked anyway. No answer. I tried nothing. I looked down and noticed the package I held was trembling slightly. My hands weren't shaking, but the box was vibrating. I quickly set it down and stepped back. I didn't try again. That night, the dragging began again, this time at 21. It lasted longer, louder, almost rhythmic, like someone was pacing but dragging one leg behind them. Then it stopped abruptly, not faded, stopped. I barely slept. In the morning, I went to the super. Mr. Lewinsky was the kind of man who seemed older than his years, mostly because he carried the weight of the building like it had grown roots inside his spine. I asked him casually, over a forced conversation about hallway lighting, whether anyone lived in 6E. He paused, then looked at me too long before saying, "That one's empty. Has been for years." When I pushed further, asking if it had been shown or rented recently, he grew impatient. "No one in 60E. Trust me, I'd know." I didn't press more, mostly because something about the way he said it made me feel like the subject had been touched before. That night, I recorded the wall. I put my phone against it and let the voice memo run while I tried to sleep. I didn't expect much, but when I played it back in the morning, my stomach sank. There was the dragging, louder than it ever sounded in person. The thuds too. But there was something else, a voice, garbled, slurred, over and over, one word, not a name, a question. "One." I played it again. Slower. "One." I couldn't tell if it was a woman's voice. It sounded broken, like the vocal cords were shredded. I deleted the file. That was probably a mistake. I should have saved it, sent it to someone, but instead I buried it, like most people do with uncomfortable truths. That weekend I visited my sister, hoping a few nights away would recalibrate my nerves. Her house was loud in the way suburban families are. Dogs barking, children screaming, dishes clanking. It was a reprieve. But one morning, while she took the kids to soccer, I stayed behind to catch up on work. I heard it then. Faint. Through the wall of the guest bedroom, a slow drag. 3 thuds. Silence. I froze. Then it repeated. It wasn't loud. Could have been the house creaking. Could have been. I left that day. When I got back to 60F, it smelled faintly of bleach. Not overpowering, just noticeable. Like someone had cleaned in a hurry. I checked the hallway, no signs of maintenance, no work orders. I didn't ask Mr. Lewinsky this time. I didn't want to hear him say again that no one was in 6E, because I'd started to believe he was lying. Not out of malice, but because it's easier to deny something than face it. I began watching the hallway through my peephole. Waiting. Every night from midnight to 2. I watched and I waited, and nothing. Until one night I saw someone. A shape, barely visible, standing still outside 6E, not moving. Just there. I squinted, heart racing, hand frozen on the doorknob. The light in the hallway flickered, casting shadows that played tricks on my eyes, and then it was gone. No movement, no footsteps. Just gone. I opened my door then, for the first time in weeks, and walked to 6E. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. But when I stepped back, I saw it. Just below the doorframe, the faintest smear. Like a fingerprint dragged in ash. I reached down to touch it, but before my fingers made contact, a soft knock came from the other side. 3 taps. Deliberate, I stumbled backward and ran into my own apartment, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit. I just stood, staring at my wall, waiting. The dragging didn't come that night, nor the next. Just silence. I told myself it was over, that I imagined it. That stress does strange things. I tried to believe it. But the following Tuesday, when I got home from work, there was a note slipped under my door. Handwritten, no envelope. Just 2 words, not yet. I stood there for a long time, just holding it. The handwriting was jagged, childlike. The letters uneven, like written by someone who had forgotten how to form them. I turned it over. Nothing. I thought about calling someone. The police, a friend, anyone. But what would I say? That I was being haunted by a silent apartment. That dragging sounds were following me across city lines. I didn't call. Instead, I took sleeping pills and tried to lose myself in a haze. The dreams that night were worse, not nightmares. Something else. A looping memory of a hallway that never ended, doors without numbers, and somewhere in the dark, a voice whispering, 1. Always 1. Never. I woke up gasping, throat raw, fingernails torn from clutching my sheets too tightly. That morning, I made the mistake of opening my closet. I hadn't used it in weeks, choosing instead to live out of a suitcase. But that day, I opened it, and there, just inside, tucked into the corner, was a small wooden wheel. Like the kind used on old carts, it was stained, sticky, and beside it, a drag mark, leading from the back of the closet to the wall, a wall that connected directly to 6E. I left it untouched. I closed the closet and sat down on the floor. And I realized then, with a kind of heavy certainty, that something was waiting. Not in the closet, not in the apartment, but in time, waiting for a moment. A question waiting for when? I tried to forget about the wheel. For days I didn't open the closet again. I showered with the bathroom door open, sat near the front door, and left lights on in every room even when I wasn't in them. But it was no use, because I knew it was still there, and worse, I could feel it, the same way you feel a storm hours before it hits. A tension in the jaw, the skin behind your ears humming. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and by the end of the week I started to hallucinate flashes. Blurs in the corners of my eyes that vanished the moment I turned. Once I caught my reflection lagging behind in the mirror. Not a metaphor. A true, delayed reflection. I stopped looking in mirrors after that. But the worst part wasn't the images. It was the sound. The dragging returned. Only now it came at different hours. Sometimes 4 a.m. Sometimes during daylight when the city was loud and disinterested. I'd hear it in the middle of a phone call, while stirring pasta, even once while brushing my teeth. And the thuds grew sharper. Less like something dropped and more like someone knocking from within the wall. No one believed me. I tested the waters once with a friend, Lena. She was rational, smart, skeptical in the best way. I casually mentioned the sounds, omitting the more surreal elements. She offered to stay a night, assuming I was just anxious. I agreed, thinking maybe she'd confirm something. Or better, hear nothing at all. That night she stayed in my bed while I dozed lightly in the living room, the couch too stiff, the room too quiet. I didn't hear the dragging. I didn't hear anything. In fact, it was the first silence I'd experienced in weeks. But in the morning, Lena was gone. I found the front door closed but unlocked, her overnight bag still on the chair. Her phone on the nightstand. No note. No message. I called her. No answer. I called again, and again, and again. The voicemail didn't even play. Just a flat beep. I visited her apartment that afternoon. No one answered. I left a note. Waited hours. When I returned the next day, the note was gone, but the door remained closed. The landlord said she'd moved out 2 days prior, left in a rush. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. He shrugged. Some people just vanish. My mouth went dry. I asked to see her apartment. He refused. I returned home feeling like my body didn't fit me anymore, like my skin had shrunk half a size. I stood outside 60 again. This time I pressed my palm against the door. Cold, but pulsing, ever so slightly, like something behind it was breathing. I went to my unit and opened the closet. The wheel was gone, but in its place was a square, neatly drawn shape in black marker, maybe 10 inches wide, right against the back wall. Inside it a message, ITSTILL. Dune TSPEAK. No signature, just that. I slammed the door shut and paced the room until the radiator groaned loud enough to break the air. Then I left. I walked the entire neighborhood. I didn't take my phone. Didn't look up. I needed to be around life. Barking dogs, burnt coffee smells, garbage trucks, and cracked pavement. Anything to remind me I still lived in a real place. I stayed out until night and only returned when exhaustion overcame fear. But the second I stepped through the front door of the building, something was off. The air was thicker, warmer, as if someone had been breathing into it for hours without exhaling. I reached my door and saw it immediately. Another note. Same paper, same handwriting. Just one word, closer. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed fully clothed, shoes on, eyes wide. But no sounds came, only that awful silence again, a silence that knew I was listening. The next morning, I called out of work. I needed answers. I knocked on the other neighbors' doors, hoping someone would break the unspoken rule of silence in this place. Most didn't answer. The ones who did gave tight smiles and quick nods, but an older woman in 6B cracked her door and leaned out just far enough to speak in a whisper. "Don't go near 6E, she said, eyes darting to either side. "It doesn't like attention." I asked what she meant. She just shook her head, pulled the door shut, and turned the lock with 3 deliberate clicks. That was more than I'd gotten from anyone. I wrote it down in a notebook I'd begun to keep, tracking every sound, every note, every moment that didn't belong. A kind of protection, as if documenting the madness made it less likely to consume me. That night, I awoke to the sound of my own voice. Not a dream, not in my head, my voice. Calling out from the closet, it said, my name. Over and over, a little too fast, a little too wrong, like a recording played backward and then reversed to approximate something familiar. I didn't move, not until the voice stopped. And then came 3 knocks. From inside the closet. I left again, slept on a bench near the bus terminal, came back the next afternoon and found another note on the floor, DOABMAKUS KOKEXKALUGI. I tore it up. I screamed. I threw my lamp across the room. But it didn't change anything. The next night, I didn't wait. I didn't record. I opened the closet at midnight, stared at the square on the wall, and whispered, "What do you want?" Nothing happened. I sat there shaking until I finally crawled into bed. That's when I noticed the scratch marks on the inside of my window. Long, curved, like someone trying to claw their way out. Not in. The next day I bought paint and covered the square in the closet. I unplugged the fridge, tossed my phone, and turned off the breaker to the apartment. I didn't want sound. I didn't want light. I sat in the middle of the floor and waited. When the dragging started again, I screamed. Not in fear, in defiance. A deep, raw, animal scream that came from somewhere I didn't know existed inside me. The dragging stopped. The silence returned. And then a laugh. Low, gurgling, hideous, not from the wall. From inside me. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. Not food, paper, wadded notes, soaked in ink, illegible. I collapsed on the floor and slept there until morning. When I woke, the walls of the bathroom were covered in writing. My handwriting. Over and over, W.H.N. I didn't remember doing it, but my fingers were stained black. I wanted to believe I was losing my mind. That would have been better than what I was beginning to suspect. I wasn't being haunted. I was being rewritten. My thoughts, my voice, even my body, like something was trying to wear me, use me, speak through me. And worst of all, I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. The next time the knocking came, I didn't wait. I didn't hide. I walked to 6E and knocked back. 3 times, deliberate. Then I spoke. Tell me what you want. A pause. Then a whisper so soft I barely heard it. Open. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. I pushed the door inward. What I saw wasn't possible. The apartment was a mirror of mine. Same layout, same fixtures, but everything was reversed as if someone had built an inverted copy. The air was thick and sweet like rot covered with perfume. And in the center of the room sat a chair. On it, Lena, or something wearing Lena's face, but her eyes were wrong. Too large. Too still. She smiled, then spoke in my voice ready. You're almost ready. I backed out and slammed the door, ran to the stairwell. Didn't stop running until I was blocks away. I tried calling for help, but my voice was hoarse, my words jumbled, like I'd forgotten how to form them. When I looked down, my palms were ink-stained again. In my pocket. A note. This one said, "Soon." I didn't go home that night, or the night after, but I kept hearing the dragging, in train stations, at work, even in crowded restaurants, and the thuds, soft, insistent, always three. People say you can leave places behind, that you can start fresh, but they're wrong, because some doors follow you. And some stories don't end until they're finished telling you. I'm not sure where I'll be when the final knock comes. But I know this: when it does, I won't open the door. I'll be the one waiting behind it. I stayed in motels for a while, the kind of places where the curtains never fully close and the beds feel damp even when they're dry. I didn't bring much, just the clothes I had on, a notebook with smeared pages, and my mind, which felt more like a window left cracked open in a storm. At first, I thought putting distance between myself and apartment 6D would help. But it didn't matter where I went. The dragging still came. At different times now, like it was learning. In one motel room I swore I heard it on the ceiling. In another, it came through the pipes when I turned on the faucet. The thuds were less frequent but more deliberate. 3 knocks. Always 3. And worse, the whispering had followed me. It no longer came from the walls. It came from my dreams. Dreams where I was walking down endless hallways of mirrored apartments, opening doors to find copies of myself doing things I didn't understand. Eating paper, whispering into closets, painting over invisible symbols. I would wake up choking, my mouth filled with the taste of ink and copper. I started seeing reflections again. Only they weren't mine. My face, yes, but not my expression. A version of me looking back with a smirk when I was terrified, or frowning when I tried to smile. I stopped looking in mirrors altogether, but that didn't stop the feeling. It's strange how fast your body can stop trusting itself. The way your fingers can twitch when you're not moving. The way your tongue can taste blood when your mouth is empty. And worst of all, the way your voice can sound just slightly wrong when you hear it echo in a room. At one point, I found myself in a diner at 3 a.m., surrounded by truckers and insomniacs. I tried to feel normal, to focus on the smell of burnt coffee and the squeak of old vinyl booths. But when I glanced out the window, I saw her again. Lena. Across the street. Just standing there. Still, watching. I ran outside, heart slamming, feet hitting pavement with a sick rhythm. But she was gone. Only her shadow remained, stretched unnaturally long against the sidewalk. I never saw her face. Just that stillness. That impossible stillness. The kind you feel in a photo right before it moves. That's when I decided to go back. Not because I thought I'd win, not because I had a plan, but because I realized something horrifying. It didn't matter where I went. This thing had already rewritten something inside me. I wasn't escaping it. I was dragging it behind me, invisible chains on bloodless wrists. I returned to the building 3 weeks after I'd left. It looked the same, maybe cleaner, maybe quieter. The hallway smelled of fresh paint, and the light above 6D had been replaced. Brighter, whiter. I stood outside my old door and waited. My key still worked. That felt like a joke. Inside, the apartment was spotless. My things were gone, the walls freshly painted, but the closet door was ajar. I stepped toward it, every nerve in my body screaming, and opened it. The square on the back wall was uncovered again. No paint, no marker. Just a small, embedded panel of wood, like a door inside the wall. I reached for it. It didn't move, but a sound came from behind it. Breathing, I stepped back, sat on the floor, and I waited. Minutes passed. Then hours. I think I fell asleep because when I woke, there was a note on my chest. Different paper this time, thicker, older. The kind you'd find in an antique journal, written in red ink. Speak the name. But there was no name. I didn't know what it wanted. I read it again, and again. Then something clicked. Not a thought, not a memory, a sound, a word I didn't know I knew. Ultra. I said it. Whispered it. The closet light flickered. The panel shifted ever so slightly. The breath behind it turned into a sigh. And then, nothing. Just a heavy stillness. I crawled into bed fully clothed, unable to shake the weight in my chest. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting. Morning came like a lie. Too bright. Too cheerful. I stood in front of the mirror for the first time in days. My reflection looked back, blank, pale. But then it smiled. I hadn't. I slammed the bathroom door and ran. Down the hallway, past the elevators, into the stairwell. And as I descended, the sound followed me. Not footsteps, the dragging. Closer now. Smiling, I made it to the street and collapsed onto the curb. Someone helped me up. A woman. Young, kind eyes. She asked if I needed help. I nodded. I told her I was sick, that I hadn't been sleeping. She offered to walk me somewhere. I don't know why I said yes. We ended up at a park bench. She sat beside me. Said her name was Claire. I tried to listen. I really did. But all I could focus on was her voice. It was familiar, too familiar. When she said, "It's going to be okay," I heard it. The echo, a delay, the same delay I'd heard before. I turned to her, heart racing. "What did you say?" I asked. She smiled, but her lips didn't move. The words came a moment later. "You're ready." I ran again. I didn't stop until I hit water. The city's river looked black under the overcast sky. I sat by the railing, trying to breathe, trying to remember the last time I felt real. A jogger passed me and paused. Said I looked pale. I didn't answer. He looked familiar, too. Too many people did now. As if the world had a limited cast and the same actors kept playing different roles. Later that night, back in the apartment, I found a new note in the closet. "You opened the door. Now open the story." I didn't know what it meant until I looked at my notebook. The pages were full. I'd written in it again. Only it wasn't my handwriting anymore. It had changed, more elegant. Older. The entries described events I hadn't lived, rooms I'd never entered, names I'd never spoken aloud, and at the end, a final line. "Now they will come for you." I burned the notebook. Thought it might stop something. But that night, when I turned on the faucet, ink poured out. Thick, black ink. I screamed. No one heard me. The building was silent as a tomb. The next morning, I opened my closet again. The panel had opened. Behind it, stairs leading down into black. I don't remember deciding to go down. I just know I did. Step by step, the air grew colder, wet. The walls pulsed like veins. At the bottom room, empty. Except for a chair. And in the chair, me. Or what looked like me. It didn't move. It just watched. I stepped forward. The lights flickered. The figure opened its mouth. "Not yet," it said. And vanished. I screamed, but my voice was gone. No echo, no sound. Just the thudding return of my heart. And from the shadows, the dragging began again, this time moving toward me. I climbed the stairs back up, each step heavier. At the top, the closet door was gone. Just a wall. Smooth, seamless. I was trapped. No, not trapped. Rewritten. The apartment was the same, but not. The window now showed a different street. The calendar was wrong. The photos on the wall were of people I'd never met. But one photo showed me, smiling, arms around Claire. I touched it. The glass was warm. Behind me, someone knocked. 3 times. I didn't move. I just whispered 1. And from behind the door, the answer came, no. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I just stood there, forehead pressed to the cold wood, hearing the echo of that single word. No. Ricochet through the bones of the apartment like it belonged here more than I did. My breath came in shallow bursts. The air was thick, not just humid but charged, as if everything around me was waiting for me to do something, move. Flee. Surrender. But I did nothing. I couldn't tell if minutes passed or hours. Eventually, the knocking didn't resume. It didn't need to. The silence was worse, more purposeful. A kind of silence that made your ears ring, that filled your head with imagined sounds just to break the pressure. When I finally backed away from the door, I turned to look at the apartment again. It was fully furnished. Something I hadn't done. A plush sofa, a cracked leather chair by the window, a coffee table I didn't own. It was like someone had taken the idea of my life and filled in the blanks with their version of it. I walked to the kitchen. It smelled of oranges and bleach. The fridge was stocked. The calendar on the wall marked a date 2 weeks ahead. I tore it down. Underneath was another calendar, same date, same markings. I tore that too. The wall beneath it was smooth, too smooth, like skin healed over a wound. The bathroom mirror now reflected nothing, not even light, just a dim smear where my reflection should have been. I reached out to touch it and felt warmth, like another hand pressing back. I ran. Out into the hallway, down the stairs, past the super who didn't even blink as I passed. Outside, the sky looked the same. The street hummed with the usual dull indifference of city life. But everything felt subtly ours. Too faded. The faces. Too smooth. Like details from a painting you weren't meant to inspect closely. I found a cafe, sat in the corner. Ordered something I couldn't taste. Watched people walk past the windows and tried to convince myself this was real. That I was real. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed some line, opened some fold in the fabric of reality and stepped through. And now I was somewhere else entirely. That night I returned, not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. My apartment was waiting for me. Lights already on. Music playing softly from an old radio I didn't own. A jazz melody. Slow, disjointed, full of wrong notes that didn't register until you noticed how they looped. Over and over. I turned it off. It came back on. I unplugged it. Still played. I smashed it against the floor, and it finally stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the music. Then I saw the closet door was open. Again. I approached slowly, heart punching inside my chest. The stairs were still there, but this time, light pulsed from below, soft, reddish, like breathing embers. I descended. I don't know why. Maybe I'd given up. Maybe I needed to know. Maybe I was already gone, and this was just the echo of my final decision playing itself out in an endless loop. At the bottom, the room had changed. No longer empty. Now it was a library. Endless rows of shelves filled with books, all unlabeled, all the same size and color. I pulled one down and opened it. My name was on the first page, then another and another. Each one a version of my life, some identical, others grotesquely different. One where I had a brother I never met. One where I never left my hometown. One where I died as a child. And one where I opened the door in apartment 6E the first time it knocked. I dropped the book and backed away. My breathing was ragged. My eyes scanned the walls until I saw her again. Lena, sitting at the desk at the far end of the room, flipping through pages. She looked up and smiled. "You're doing well," she said. But her mouth didn't move. The words came from the air itself. She stood, her form flickering slightly, like an old VHS tape. "You're almost ready." I tried to speak. No words came. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a key. Held it toward me. I didn't take it. I couldn't. "You must choose your ending," the air whispered again. "Or the story chooses for you." I turned and ran. The stairwell wasn't there anymore. Just a tunnel, lined with doors. Each one marked with a number, not apartment numbers. Years. 1996, 2004, 23. I opened one. Living room. Mine, but not. My mother was alive. She looked up, smiled, offered me a drink. I slammed the door shut. Another door. My college dorm. But I was the roommate, watching myself study. The other me didn't notice. I opened door after door, until finally I found one marked now. I stepped inside and I was back, my apartment. But not quite. The lighting was wrong. Dimmer. Or maybe deeper. My reflection was back in the mirror, smiling. Without me. I walked toward it. It moved first. I raised my right hand. It raised its left. A true mirror. But the eyes weren't mine. They were watching me, not copying. The reflection opened its mouth and whispered, "Soon." I turned away, went to the kitchen, opened a drawer. Inside, hundreds of no received, each some I hadn't, some with words I'd never seen. "Eltra is listening. Don't lie to her. You are not the first." And one that made me collapse to the floor. "You wrote this." I stared at it for hours, until I heard the dragging again, not from the closet. From inside the walls, closer, scraping, like nails on brick, then thuds. 3. Slow. Final. Not in feared. Not with a name. Eltra. The apartment shuddered. A crack appeared on the ceiling, running from wall to wall. The lights blinked out, and in the dark a voice I hadn't heard before. Childlike. Sweet, but laced with something too ancient to define. "No, we begin." Everything spun. The walls bent inward. The floor rippled beneath my feet. I collapsed, clutching my head. And then silence. I awoke in bed. Morning light streaming through the window. Birds chirping. The radio silent. I dared to believe it was over, until I saw the calendar. The date was wrong. 2 years ahead. My name had changed. On my ID, on my mail. Even my voice, when I answered a call, was different. Deeper. Me, but aged. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I didn't recognize. And then I remembered. The story chooses for you. Unless you write it first. But I hadn't written anything. I just followed the script. Opened the doors. Spoken the names. I tried to escape. Again. Moved cities. Changed names. Disguised myself. But it always found me. Not the dragging. Not the knocking. The rewriting. Slowly, piece by piece, I began receiving letters. Not from people. From places. Addresses that didn't exist. With instructions. Scenes to play out. Lines to deliver. One letter told me to kiss a stranger in a bookstore. I did. She whispered, "You're almost done." Another told me to jump into a lake at midnight. I did. The water whispered stories in my ear. Stories of lives I hadn't lived, yet. I'm telling you this not as a warning, but as a record, because I've started writing again, and when I write things change. The dragging stops. The mirror clears. The calendar resets. I think that's the secret. Not escaping the story, but owning it. Becoming the author. Before it writes you out. I don't know how much time I have. But if you're reading this, if you've heard the dragging, if the closet door ever opens on its own, don't ignore it. And whatever you do, don't ask one. Ask who? Ask what? Ask what next? Because if you don't, it will answer for you. And you won't like the ending it chooses. The day I decided to take control, the air changed. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean literally. It was heavier, like walking through a place where gravity was just slightly wrong. Everything had a pull. The walls of the apartment, the books on the shelf, the reflection in the mirror. They all seemed to watch me, lean toward me, anticipate my move like they'd already read the page I was still writing. I began to test the boundaries. I didn't speak the names. I didn't read the notes. I burned the ones that appeared. I started writing my own, short sentences, declarations of fact, anchors to keep me steady. My name is mine. This is my voice. I do not belong to the apartment. I taped them to the walls, folded them into coat pockets, left them under my pillow. Some vanished by morning, but others stayed, as if they'd been accepted into the narrative, woven into whatever rules governed this place. The writing helped. For a time, the dragging slowed. The knocking paused. I even went 2 days without hearing a voice that didn't belong to someone I could see. But then, on the third morning, I woke to find every word I'd written altered. My name is mine had become, her name is mine. This is my voice now read. This is our voice. The paper was the same, the handwriting too, but the intent had been warped, like the story was rejecting my edits. I tore them down, rewrote them, burned the copies. But from that point on, it was clear the apartment wasn't passive anymore. It was responding. I started hearing footsteps at odd hours, not upstairs, inside. Slow, deliberate, pacing just behind the walls. I tried to trace the sound once, pressing my ear to each surface, moving like a hunter in my own home. When I reached the far end of the hallway, the wall felt warm. Not just warm, pulsing, like a heartbeat. And then came a whisper. Not from the wall, but from inside my skull. Write it true or we'll write you out. I fell back, trembling, clutching the pen in my hand like it could stab the reality back into place. That night, the closet door was gone. Not closed. Gone. Sealed behind drywall that hadn't been there the day before. Fresh paint, no seam, like it had never existed. I knocked. No answer. I tapped 3 times, nothing. I whispered the name. Haltra. The wall trembled, a ripple beneath the surface. Then a single word blood through, in a voice not my own. Rewrite. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the only notebook I hadn't burned. The one that had started all of this. The one with entries I didn't remember writing. I flipped through pages. Read my own voice speaking things I didn't recall saying. Promises I didn't remember making. I let her in. I became the page. I was never me. My hand shook as I turned to the last page, which had always been blank. Now it held one sentence. Chapter 5 begins with surrender. And below it, a line, sign here. I shut the book, locked it in a drawer, buried the drawer under furniture, and then I left the apartment. Not forever. I knew better than that, but long enough to breathe, to see if the world outside still existed in a way I could trust. I stayed with a friend, not Lena. She was gone now. Not missing. Just overwritten. I visited her old place once, months after she vanished. A new woman lived there. Same name, same voice, but no memory of me, no memory of herself. When I asked about 60E, she smiled like a doll and said, "That's not a number. That's a name." I left without looking back. The friend I stayed with this time was normal. Real. The kind of person who used a landline and still read newspapers. I told her nothing. She asked nothing. We watched old movies, made pasta, played board games where the rules didn't shift under your hands. For a moment, I forgot, but on the 4th night, I saw the calendar on her fridge. It had changed. The date was wrong, 3 days ahead. Circled in red, one it ends. I asked her what it meant. She looked at me blank-faced. "You wrote it." I didn't. I swear I didn't. But that's the thing about stories, they creep. They don't stay on the page. They grow roots in your life. They pretend to be coincidence. A headline you dreamed, a conversation you didn't start, a familiar face on a stranger. The morning after that, I went back. I had to. The apartment door was open. Inside, everything had changed. It was no longer an apartment. It was a corridor, long windowless, lined with shelves stacked high with notebooks, cassettes, photographs. I walked past them slowly, recognizing none, but feeling them all, like every object carried a version of me that never got to live. I stopped at a photograph, a child's birthday party. I was in it, but I didn't remember the party, didn't remember ever owning that sweater. A tape labeled, Voice of 37, caught my eye. I played it. Static then, he's not ready. My voice. Then another. Then make him. Hers. I turned it off. At the end of the corridor stood a door. Numbered. 1. It had never been there before. I opened it. Inside was a room with no ceiling, just sky. Endless, colorless sky that stretched in every direction. In the center a chair, a desk, and the notebook. The original. The one I'd buried. I stepped forward. No wind. No sound. Just the pressure of presence, like 1,000 eyes in every direction, waiting for my hand to move. The notebook opened on its own, a fresh page. One line written, "Write what happened next." And beneath it, my pen. I didn't pick it up. I sat, I stared, I waited for fear. It didn't come. Only understanding. This had never been about haunting, or possession, or madness. This was authorship. The kind that doesn't ask. The kind that takes. And now it was offering it back. I could write. I could take the pen. I could write Lena out. Or write her back. I could erase the voices. Or amplify them. But I'd learned something in all the silence, in all the dragging and thudding and rewritten calendars. The moment you pick up the pen, you become part of it. The pen never stops. It keeps writing long after your hand goes still. So I made my choice. I wrote one sentence. I give this story to you. Then I placed the pen down. The notebook closed itself, and the sky above the room began to ripple, a shimmer like heat above asphalt. Then it folded inward, tight, tighter, until the sky was a page, and the page turned. I awoke in my bed, my old bed, the apartment back to normal. The walls still, the mirror closet, no dragging, nothing. I checked the calendar. It was blank, just blank. Not empty, just waiting. I checked my phone, no missed calls, no strange texts. My name was voice, my own. I lived, I worked, I slept. Normal returned like a stranger who doesn't knock. It just sits beside you and pretends it never left. But sometimes when I walk past the hallway where the closet used to be, I hear something. Not a sound, a suggestion, like a page turning, like a pen hovering above a blank space. I never open that wall, I never speak the name. But sometimes I write, not much, just little things, and every time I do, I feel her watching. Not to punish, not to haunt, but to make sure I remember. The story is never over. It just waits for the next writer. The silence didn't last. For a time, yes, it did its best impression of peace. Days passed where nothing shifted, nothing knocked. No breath curled through the seams of my mind whispering things I never wanted to hear again. But peace isn't a destination. It's a hallway with mirrors on both sides, and sooner or later, you catch yourself walking in the wrong direction. I went back to writing, not about the apartment, not about Lena or Eltra or the dragging. Just essays, observations, small slices of memory that I swore were mine. For months, I convinced myself that I had escaped the story, that the story had let me go. But stories don't let go, they retreat. They evolve, they wait. It started again with a sound. Not the dragging. That would have been too easy, too expected. This time it was a bell. A soft, distant chime, always 3 notes. It came from nowhere. Once at the corner of a bookstore aisle. Once while stepping onto a train. Once while dreaming of a hallway that had no end. I ignored it the first time, pretended the second time, but the third I answered. I turned instinctively toward the sound, and there, standing among the crowd of people whose faces never quite focused, was someone holding a book. Thin, covered in dust. No title, no features, just a mirror for a cover. I stared at it, then at them, but by the time I blinked, they were gone, and the book was in my hands. I didn't open it. I wanted to. My fingers itched to. But I took it home and placed it on the floor of the closet that should have never existed again. The wall was still sealed, smooth and quiet. But that night, it was warm. I lay awake with the book just on the other side of the bedroom wall, hearing nothing, but feeling everything. Like a heartbeat I hadn't noticed was missing had returned to thud in my spine. 3 days passed before I gave in. I opened the book. It wasn't blank. It wasn't written either. It was becoming. Words formed only as I read them, line by line, describing my thoughts in real time, adjusting as I hesitated, rewriting as I moved. And at the bottom of the page, always waiting, the same phrase. Continue. I didn't answer. I shut the book, but in the morning it was open again, further along. It had written the night I hadn't yet lived. I began to test it. I did things out of order, took a walk before breakfast, turned left where I always turned right, called people I hadn't spoken to in years. But the book kept up. Not always immediately, but it would catch the change and absorb it, molding the narrative around my rebellion. At first, it felt like freedom, like control, but then I noticed the cost. Every deviation brought pressure. Tiny cracks in my memory, sudden nosebleeds, gaps in time. A sentence would vanish mid-thought. A name I'd known forever would fall from my head like it had never been real. And always, the book advanced. The cover began to fade, the mirrored surface now rippling like disturbed water. Sometimes, when I looked at it too long, I'd see scenes that never happened, or hadn't yet. Me, arguing with someone who looked like Lena but wasn't. Me screaming in a hospital. Me, staring at an empty page with my hands soaked in ink. And always, in the background, the same presence. Tall, unmoving, watching with eyes that weren't eyes at all, but keyholes. I tried to burn it, I did. Took it outside, soaked it in lighter fluid, struck the match. The flame caught, smoke bloomed. Pages blackened, twisted. I stood there, coughing, feeling some deep tether snap loose. But when I returned home, it was there, pillow, unmarked. Open to a new page that was unwise. The notes began again, not under doors, not slipped in my pocket. They were part of things now. The back of receipts, inside cereal boxes. Once, in the folds of a shirt I hadn't worn in months. Always the same pen, always the same hand. You're stalling. Write faster. Duh. We are waiting. I wasn't writing for me anymore. I wasn't even resisting. I was delaying the inevitable. I went to the library to research the name again. I tried all the sources I hadn't checked before. Deep archives. Occult texts. Online forums buried in layers of encryption. Most led nowhere. But one led to a name I hadn't seen in years. Clara Wynne. The woman who'd lived in 6E decades ago. The one whose death was never explained. One article, half erased, preserved by chance, described her as a failed medium. Someone who had tried to channel stories, to make herself a vessel for forgotten voices, and she'd succeeded, for a time, until she lost the ability to stop. Her final words, according to the article, were scrawled in ash on her wall. The story became hungry. I returned to the apartment, not because I thought I could win, but because I understood something now. I wasn't haunted. I was chosen. I had picked up the pen too many times. I had answered too many questions. I had opened too many doors. The only choice left was to finish, to write the ending before it wrote itself. The apartment was as I left it, quiet, still, except now the closet door was back, open, and the stairs below glowed not red but gold, a soft, inviting light, like the story wanted to thank me. I descended, one step for each page I'd turned. At the bottom, the library was gone. In its place, a round room with walls made entirely of mirrors, every reflection a different version of me. Some smiling, some bleeding, some blank. In the center, a desk. And at the desk her, not Lena, not Clara Wynne, Naltra, all of them. None of them. Just the shape the story had taken to speak to me. She looked up and said nothing. Just slid a paper across the desk. It had one question. Do you want to be remembered? And I froze, because that was the truth beneath it all, wasn't it? The reason any of us tells stories, not just to make sense of the world, not just to escape, but to remain, to leave something behind, to be more than dust and silence. And they had offered me that. A story that never ends. A story that consumes but never forgets. I signed my name. The pen ink shimmered for a moment. Gold, then black, then gone. And the woman stood. She walked toward me. As she passed, she whispered, "Now you'll never be forgotten." I awoke in the apartment. Different again. Brahmer. No dragging. No voices. The book was gone. The closet was sealed. The calendar was blank. I went to the mirror. My face looked the same. My eyes did not. I stepped outside, walked into the world, lived again. Wrote again, but this time I noticed things. People hesitating in hallways. Others staring too long at reflections. A man muttering a name he claimed he'd heard in a dream. A child scribbling words she didn't understand. And always, the echoes. The same story, scattered across different lives, different forms. I understood then. The story never ends. It only expands. And now you've heard it too. The sound in your hallway. The tapping at your door. That whisper you thought was your name misheard in a dream. It's not your imagination. It's your prologue. Because I've written enough. And now it's your turn to continue. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.